The Silent Killer. In the 1970s, a journalist named Seymour Hersh published an explosive article in the New York Times. He accused the CIA of attempting to assassinate both foreign and American politicians who were seen as anti-war dissidents. These allegations were so serious that they led the U.S. Senate to investigate the CIA for covert abuses. The investigation resulted in 14 detailed reports that exposed major misconduct by the CIA, FBI, and NSA. Among the accusations were crimes like tampering with private mail for years and illegally spying on Black Power activists. While these revelations were shocking, they paled in comparison to one claim that seemed almost too wild to believe. This allegation suggested that the CIA had developed a pistol capable of firing poison darts over 300 feet. The darts could kill someone and leave no evidence of what caused their death. At first, this sounded like a far-fetched conspiracy theory, but the investigation revealed that the weapon, dubbed the heart attack gun, was real. It was part of a top-secret program called MK Naomi, through which the CIA worked to develop weapons for biological warfare. In 1975, William Colby, the CIA's director at the time, was summoned to testify before the committee investigating the agency. During his questioning, Colby admitted that the CIA had developed several biological weapons, initially as part of a World War II-era plan to eliminate German leaders. However, their research had continued well beyond the war, leading to innovations like the heart attack gun. The weapon was described as nearly silent, powered by a small battery hidden inside its handle. It was engineered to be so discreet that the target would feel nothing more than a mosquito bite when struck by one of its darts. These darts were coated with a toxin derived from shellfish and is virtually undetectable. Once the dart entered the body, it would dissolve completely, leaving only a tiny red mark at the point of entry. This made it impossible for forensic pathologists to determine the true cause of death, often concluding the victim had suffered an unexplained heart attack. They requested to know if the heart attack gun has been used in real-world operation. Colby insisted it had only been used in experimental tests and that no official records of its deployment existed. However, given the nature of the program, some doubt his testimony was entirely truthful. As part of the investigation, the CIA was forced to hand over the gun to the committee. Photographs from the hearing show committee members carefully examining the strange weapon, while Colby fielded questions about its development and intended uses. The sight of a device like the heart attack gun felt like something straight out of a spy thriller, yet it was chillingly real, raising unsettling questions about how far the CIA might have been willing to go to eliminate perceived threats. Even more disturbing is the realization that if the committee hadn't exposed the weapon, the CIA might have continued using it for covert assassinations without anyone ever finding out. And if such advanced technology existed in the 70s, it's hard to imagine what kinds of tools intelligence agencies might be developing today. The 1975 hearing was the first and only time the heart attack gun was shown publicly. And what happened to it after the investigation remains a mystery, leaving many to wonder if this infamous weapon, or something even more sinister, could still be in use today. The U.S. government poisoning alcohols. The 18th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution triggered the start of a ban on January 18, 1920. This law made it illegal to produce, sell, or move alcohol. The goal was to reduce drinking, but instead it led to a large underground market. Bootleggers and secret bars called speakeasies became popular. As illegal alcohol businesses grew, the government tried harder to enforce the ban. With the black market booming, the government began to take more drastic measures to enforce its ban on alcohol. As part of these efforts, rumors began circulating that the U.S. government had gone to extreme lengths to discourage people from drinking alcohol. Allegedly, the government was intentionally poisoning alcohol to make those who consumed it seriously ill. For a time, this remained a mere conspiracy theory, dismissed by many as outlandish. However, in a chilling twist, these rumors would turn out to be true. The turning point came on New Year's Day, 1927, when 41 people tragically died from alcohol poisoning at New York's Bellevue Hospital. The victims had been drinking what they believed to be regular alcohol, but post-mortem examinations revealed that they had consumed industrial methanol, also known as wood alcohol. Unlike ethanol, which is the type of alcohol found in beverages, methanol is highly toxic, and even small amounts can be fatal. This incident brought to light a sinister truth. The U.S. government had been deliberately ordering companies to add toxic substances to industrial alcohol since as early as 1906, well before Prohibition began. The process, known as denaturing, was designed to make alcohol undrinkable by adding chemicals like methanol, quinine, and other toxic agents. The reasoning behind this was simple. If bootleggers knew their alcohol was poisoned, they would be deterred from distributing it. But in reality, the demand for alcohol during Prohibition was so high that bootleggers simply ignored the risks. The government's response to this growing black market was to escalate its efforts. As Prohibition went on, officials ordered companies to add even more toxic substances to industrial alcohol, ensuring that it was even more dangerous to consume. What the government failed to account for, however, was the fact that criminal enterprises were not concerned with the safety of their customers. Black market dealers had a huge opportunity to profit, even if it meant putting their customers at risk. With the growing popularity of black markets, many people began to unknowingly consume this poisoned alcohol, leading to an increasing number of deaths. This crisis became a silent outbreak, and it wasn't until December 1933, when the ban was finally revoked, that the government began to ease up on its strict measures. But by that time, thousands of innocent people had been poisoned, and many had tragically lost their lives. This troubling chapter in U.S. history highlights the extreme measures the government took in an effort to enforce the ban. While the intentions behind these actions were to ease alcohol consumption and reduce its negative impacts, the unintended consequences became deeply tragic. This serves as a powerful reminder of the complex and sometimes unforeseen outcomes that can arise when policies are put into effect with limited foresight. The CIA's secret LSD experiment. In the mid-20th century, the CIA embarked on a secretive operation that sought to control the minds of non-consenting American citizens. This operation, known as Operation Midnight Climax, may sound like a normal conspiracy theory, but this turned out to be very real. This dark chapter of U.S. history was also once nothing more than a rumor and was ignored until investigations in the 1970s brought it into the light. The operation was part of the CIA's larger MK-Ultra program, a top-secret project that aimed to explore mind control, behavioral manipulation, and the effects of drugs like LSD. At the time, the CIA was looking for ways to gain an advantage in the Cold War, hoping to develop techniques that could control the actions and thoughts of enemies or even allies. In the early stages of this operation, the CIA enlisted the help of prostitutes to lure men to safe houses in San Francisco and New York City. These locations were set up as fronts to monitor the effects of LSD on these individuals. Little did the men know, they were being watched through one-way mirrors while unknowingly dosed with the drug. As the men indulged in sexual encounters, the agents behind the glass observed their every move, documenting how LSD altered their behavior. Another aspect they tested was the effect of combining LSD in isolation, where the subjects would be dosed and isolated for months at a time with minimal food and water. Operation Midnight Climax was revealed in the 1970s during the investigations into the CIA activities. The paper records of the operation were later destroyed, and during the trials, many agents claimed they could not remember details about it, and there were no records for Congress to verify, leading to no noted convictions or justice for the individuals involved. Also, official results of these experiments were not released, but George Hunter White, an agent at the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, and Ike Feldman, a former military intelligence officer who oversaw the experiments, noticed that subjects spoke far more freely when under the influence of a combination of drugs and sex. No one knows where the test subjects are now or what effects they may have suffered. As a result of these findings, President Ford signed an executive order in 1976 that prohibited experimentation with drugs on human subjects, except with the informed consent in writing and also witnessed by a neutral party of each such human subject. This attempted to prevent unethical projects from occurring in the future. The abductions of Japanese citizens. In June 1978, Yaeko Taguchi, a 22-year-old single mother of two, vanished without a trace. That night, she had finished her usual shift at Cabaret Hollywood in Tokyo and walked out the front door just after midnight, never to be seen again. At first, no one suspected anything serious had happened. Her manager even revealed years later that they had assumed she quit when she didn't show up for work. At the time, whispers circulated about North Korean spies operating in Japan, targeting citizens for abduction, but these rumors were dismissed as mere conspiracy theories by the Japanese government. Tragically, Yaeko's case went cold, and for nearly a decade there was no sign of what had happened to her, not until a shocking series of events brought her story back into the spotlight. In November 1987, a Korean Airlines flight exploded over the Andaman Sea, killing all 115 passengers. The disaster came just as South Korea was gearing up to host the Seoul Olympics. Investigators discovered that 2 North Korean agents, acting under government orders, had planted a bomb on the plane before disembarking at an earlier layover in Abu Dhabi. One of the suspects ended their own life using a cyanide-laced cigarette as authorities closed in, but the other was captured. During interrogation, the surviving agent revealed a chilling detail. For 3 years of her 6-year mission training, she had worked closely with Yaeko Taguchi. Yaeko had been abducted and forced to teach Japanese language and culture to North Korean spies, helping them blend into foreign societies undetected. Unfortunately, she wasn't the only victim. Between 1977 and 1983, at least 17 Japanese citizens were confirmed to have been kidnapped by North Korean agents. These abducted victims were taken in broad daylight and transported by boat to North Korea. Investigations revealed the victims were ordinary people caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, rather than individuals involved in any illicit activity. One woman was abducted on her way to a knitting class, while 2 others were kidnapped during a European vacation. A 13-year-old girl disappeared while walking home from school. Some victims were used for identity theft schemes, while others like Yaeko were forced into teaching roles. After undeniable evidence emerged of the kidnappings, North Korea admitted to the abductions and issued an apology. However, they claimed that only 5 of the 17 victims were still alive. Over the years, they sent what they claimed to be the cremated remains of some victims back to Japan, but DNA tests revealed the remains were fake. This led the Japanese government to suspect that many victims were still alive. To this day, North Korea insists that the number of abduction victims is limited to 13 and that those still alive have been returned to Japan. However, Japanese officials confirmed 17 cases. An independent report suggests the true number could be as high as 800. Given the political climate, it's unlikely we'll ever uncover the full truth or see justice for these crimes. What remains clear is the unimaginable pain endured by the victims and their families who continue to wait for answers that may never come. The rogue waves. In 1826, a French captain boldly reported seeing a wave 108 feet tall while sailing in the Indian Ocean. Though he had several crew members who could back up his story, he was mocked and ridiculed by the scientific community upon returning to land. Sailors were being associated with telling tall tales, especially when it comes to their experiences out at sea, and with no one around to challenge their claims, many of their stories have passed into maritime folklore. One such tale that persisted for centuries was the account of massive waves towering over 100 feet high that some sailors claimed to have witnessed in the middle of the ocean. At that time, it was widely believed that no wave could surpass a height of 30 feet. For years, this idea kept rogue waves categorized as nothing more than myth or exaggeration. However, this story took a dramatic turn in the 80s and early 90s when a wave height recorder was installed on a gas platform in the North Sea off the coast of Norway. In January 1995, the recorder registered a monstrous 84-foot wave, providing concrete evidence that these so-called monster waves were real. This discovery prompted a re-evaluation of the claims made by sailors from centuries past, suggesting that some of them may have been telling the truth. Since the discovery, scientists have been increasingly focused on understanding the nature of rogue waves. Research indicates that at any given moment, there are likely 10 rogue waves active somewhere in the world's oceans. Typically, rogue waves are defined as waves that are twice the height of surrounding waves, appearing suddenly and without warning. They form when 2 wave crests meet at precisely the right time, creating a single enormous wave capable of devastating anything in its path. The most unsettling revelation was the likelihood that many sailors who vanished mysteriously throughout history might have fallen victim to these waves. These waves are so powerful and can be so large that they sink even the most resilient ships and oil rigs. And the scariest part is that majority of those who encountered waves that large didn't survive to tell their story. Their testimony sank along with them, lost to the deep. The Operation Sea Spray. In the early years of the Cold War, fears of biological warfare loomed large, driving governments around the world to experiment with new methods of defense and attack. One such experiment, conducted by the United States Navy, was Operation Sea Spray, a secret biological test carried out over San Francisco in 1950. The primary aim was to assess the vulnerability of American cities to biological warfare. By simulating a biological attack, they sought to understand how airborne agents would disperse in an urban environment, and whether natural factors like wind and temperature would influence their spread. San Francisco, with its dense population, was chosen as the test site. Over several days in September 1950, the U.S. Navy released massive quantities of bacteria, which were thought to be safe from ships stationed offshore. The bacteria were dispersed as a fine mist, allowing the wind to carry them over San Francisco and surrounding areas. The Navy monitored the spread of the bacteria through sampling stations placed across the city, which collected data on how far and how quickly the agents dispersed. According to military records, the operation was deemed a success. The bacteria spread throughout San Francisco, reaching as far as 30 miles inland. The results showed how easily a biological agent could infiltrate a populated area without detection, providing valuable data for future defense planning. Although the bacteria were considered non-harmful at the time, their release had unintended consequences, as shortly after the experiment, there was a notable increase in hospitalizations in San Francisco, particularly at Stanford University's hospital. One alarming case involved a man named Edward J. Nevin, who developed a severe urinary tract infection. Despite receiving treatment, Nevin's condition worsened and he eventually died. Following Nevin's death, 10 other cases of the infections were reported in the area, a phenomenon that had not been documented before the experiment. While the government denied any direct link between the bacteria release and these illnesses, many experts believe that the sudden outbreak was a direct result of Operation Sea Spray. Although the bacteria were considered harmless, their release resulted in documented cases of illness and at least one death. This contradicted the military's claim that the experiment posed no risk to public health. The notion that the U.S. government might conduct secret biological experiments on its own citizens seemed far-fetched and implausible. And while the operation gave useful information for defense strategies, it now reminds the government how important it is to carry out such efforts with openness and respect for people's well-being. The gorillas. The first recorded European encounter with an unknown creature at the time, specifically the gorillas, dates back to the 1500s, when an English explorer named Andrew Battelle was captured by the Portuguese off the coast of West Africa. While held in captivity on the mainland, Battelle observed massive, ape-like creatures around his camp. Since he had never encountered anything like them before, he described them as monstrous beings. Battelle's account fueled the imagination of people back in Europe, sparking rumors about these monstrous creatures in faraway lands. These creatures, described as terrifying and bloodthirsty, were categorized with other mythical beings, making their true nature hard to discern. In modern times, seeing a gorilla in a zoo or on TV has become a normal, everyday occurrence. But there was a time when gorillas were considered creatures of myth, just like the chupacabra, Bigfoot, the Jersey Devil, or the Loch Ness Monster. Over the following centuries, European explorers continued to send back illustrations and stories from Africa, further fueling the myth. These reports were treated as rare and prized gifts by royals and emperors. People began viewing gorillas not as animals, but as mythical beasts, much like how we view Bigfoot or other legendary creatures today. This misconception lasted for generations, with many believing that these creatures were just a part of an exotic folklore. It wasn't until the mid-19th century that any real evidence surfaced. In 1847, American naturalist Thomas Savage discovered a gorilla skull during an expedition in Africa, providing the first concrete evidence that these creatures existed. This discovery sparked even more expeditions to the region. The public's fascination with gorillas reached a peak when in the late 19th century, German explorers brought a baby gorilla to Liverpool. The animal was shown to the public, where crowds gathered in excitement to see the once mythical creature. However, to their surprise, it wasn't a massive and violent monster they thought it would be, but a playful 2-year-old who enjoyed interacting with dogs. The real turning point came in 1902, when German explorer Robert von Behring killed 2 adult mountain gorillas, revealing the true scale and nature of the species. These massive creatures, much larger than the baby gorilla previously shown, were unlike anything the public had ever imagined. At this moment, people finally began to comprehend the gorilla's true form, not as a mythical monster, but as a powerful and fascinating animal. What's even more incredible is that gorillas aren't the only creatures that were once thought to be mere myths. Animals like kangaroos, platypuses, giant squids, and Komodo dragons were initially dismissed as fabrications, legends created by the minds of adventurers and storytellers. Yet over time, these creatures were discovered to be very real. With so many once declared hoaxes later confirmed to exist, it raises a tantalizing question. How many other legendary creatures are out there in the world waiting to be discovered?